Thanks to advancements in DNA technology, long-gone cold cases have begun to heat up. We have the facts. Before DNA, the criminal justice system relied on things like bloody footprints, hair analysis, and good old word of mouth. But 1986 changed all that when English geneticist Alec Jeffreys developed the first ever application of DNA science to be used in a criminal investigation: DNA fingerprinting. Each person has a unique DNA profile, making it easy to tell person A's DNA from person B's. This kind of DNA profiling is used for paternity testing, identifying bodies or remains, studying inherited disorders, human history, evolution, and even catching poachers. Remember Jack the Ripper, the infamous serial killer who terrorized London in the late 1800s? Well, a forensic investigation identified the killer as 23-year-old Aaron Kaminsky, after scientists matched mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, from a shawl left at a crime scene to samples of Kaminsky's relatives today. mtDNA is DNA inherited from mother to child. Upon closer examination, forensic biologists can link a suspect by sampling mtDNA from relatives. The odds of two people having the same 13 patterns in their DNA is 1 in nearly 100 billion. It's the reason why you're seeing so many people track down their biological parents or ancestral roots with sites like 23andMe and Ancestry.com. 44 years after the Golden State Killer's crimes, which included at least 13 murders, more than 50 rapes, and over 100 burglaries, authorities matched DNA from one of his crime scenes to a genealogy website that's used to find people's relatives. From there, authorities found Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer. If you're familiar with serial killers, you've probably heard of the infamous Ted Bundy, who confessed to killing 30 women in the 1970s, but was suspected of killing as many as 100. Well, in 2015, DNA testing helped police confirm a missing Utah teen was actually killed by Bundy. And DNA testing isn't just a way to put people behind bars, it's also used to overturn convictions. David Vasquez was convicted of rape and murder in 1984, but DNA evidence of hair from a different suspect exonerated him 4 years after the fact. In doing so, it revealed Timothy Spencer, who became the first person convicted of murder based on DNA evidence, and was later executed. There are other developments in crime technology that have revolutionized forensics, such as CT scanners allowing doctors to perform virtual autopsies, DNA phenotyping to conjure up the physical likeness of a person based on their DNA, and bacteria analysis giving researchers the data to determine time of death. Old methods of evidence gathering, like hair, fingerprints, bite marks, blood splatters, and handwriting, have all had their validity called into question. With all things technology, the idea that your DNA could one day be used to solve a murder might not be as far-fetched as it seems.
Ted Bundy's ex Elizabeth Kendall recalls devastation seen in Falling for a Killer series. Last January, we heard from Ted Bundy, the notorious serial killer. Recordings of the man who confessed to dozens of murders were featured in Netflix's Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy Tapes released on the 30th anniversary of his execution. Now, a new Amazon docuseries enlists the help of survivors, family members of his victims, his longtime girlfriend Elizabeth Kendall and her daughter, Molly, to tell the saga from their point of view. Trish Wood, director of the 5-part documentary series Ted Bundy, Falling for a Killer, now streaming, reframes Bundy's gruesome wake through the lens of gender, she says. I would say that everybody knows Ted's name, and few people could name any of the women. I thought it was time for them to have their moment. Wood says the grisly crimes affected women's quest for independence. It began, at a time when we all thought that we'd made it through and that we were gonna have new lives and have our freedom and live as single women and have our own jobs and make our own money, she says of the 1970s killings. Then this threat of random, obliterating male violence occurred, and changed the way many of us looked at our futures after that. Woods comments on what she describes as the model looks of Bundy, who was recently played by Zac Efron in last year's Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. Bundy's clean-cut appearance was a stark contrast to his depravity. There's one photograph of Ted in tennis whites, and he looks like he's stepping right off the cover of GQ, Wood says. Bundy charmed Elizabeth Kendall, who writes in her book The Phantom Prince, My Life with Ted Bundy, re-released earlier this month, that the two first crossed paths in October 1969 and experienced an intense relationship that ended 5 years later. In Falling for a Killer, Elizabeth talks about their instant connection. It just felt like two pieces of a puzzle coming together, she says. It just fit, and it was really quite spectacular. Molly, who learned how to ride a bike from Bundy, remembers thinking he was somewhat magical. I thought he was marvelous, she says in the show. He just delighted me, and he took part in raising me. In an interview, Elizabeth Kendall tells USA Today that coming to terms with the actions of her former love has been a very complicated and difficult process. Sometimes I get trapped in thinking about the early part of our relationship and how much I did love him. And then, at other times, I'd have to really, in my mind, visualize what he had done so that I could accept it, she says. It's just so gruesome, and it's just so sad what he did, and to really understand that was really quite devastating, mentally. Although Elizabeth had her own suspicions about Bundy, and says she told police about them on multiple occasions, it wasn't until she heard him confess to crimes that she believed he'd actually committed them. In February 1978, Bundy phoned her at 2 a.m., a call she revisits in the docuseries. She acknowledges her denial during an interview. I started to feel like maybe contacting the police set in motion something that wasn't meant to be set in motion, she says. Maybe he wasn't guilty, and maybe I had gotten him into all this mess. It was so emotional, and I was so in love with him and thinking I knew him so well. So, it was just really hard to break through that denial that told me this can't be true. Still, there were times when Elizabeth saw Bundy's darker side with her own eyes. During that phone call, she asked if Bundy had attempted to murder her and Molly. He told her of a time when he blocked smoke from exiting a chimney, hoping he'd suffocate them in Elizabeth's apartment. But she believes this attempt doesn't jibe with Bundy's violent crimes and said she believes he really tried to kill her when he once pushed her off a raft into frigid waters. I think if I had drowned, that would have been satisfying to him, she says. And, of course, he could have made up a story about what happened and how it was just a terrible tragedy. That felt more like the Ted that did the crimes. Bundy's hold over Elizabeth was broken after that early morning call. After I hung up, I just felt like this is all true. It's been true. He did these things, she remembers. Today, she says she is quite happy and that before the renewed interest in Bundy, the nightmarish ordeal wasn't on her mind every day. Woods finds herself affected by the bravery of the women who shared their stories in the new series, calling out survivor Karen Sparks-Sepley. She never told her kids who she was, says Woods. She just sort of got on with it and said, women like us, we keep our secrets. We don't want to be seen as victims, we just want to live our lives. I was really moved by that.